don't have right now. Then that leads to exaggerated emotions. Emotions are not bad, there's nothing wrong with emotions. Emotions such as love, compassion, patience, etc. Those are all emotional states. They're all okay. Regret. But when we add to how phenomena really exist, when we add to that, then we add to our other perceptions, things seem more real, more permanent as they actually are, and then that leads to exaggerated emotions. So instead of regret, we have guilt. Instead of instead of love, we have attachment. Instead of compassion, we have anger. Okay, instead of seeing the other person suffer, we get angry with their negative qualities, etc. So we have these exaggerated responses, and that adds stuff to our mind, for lack of a better word, there's a better word, obstructions to our mind that keep us from seeing as things really are, and it keeps us from love and compassion to manifest. Therefore, it's all about these obstructions. Which is why the fear of a person of the middling scope, yes, it's samsara, but strictly speaking, samsara, what is samsara? My mind and body that is affected by afflictive obscurations. That's samsara. Samsara is not a place. Okay? I am born in samsara. I'm born into these aggregates that happen to be the result of afflictive obscurations to liberation. That's my samsara. And you got your own samsara. Okay? And that makes sense because also reality, your reality is what your mind perceives. Your samsaric mind perceives. My reality is what my samsaric mind perceives. In other words, my mind that is affected by my afflictive obscurations. Your mind that is affected by your afflictive obscurations. That accounts for the fact that when we look at the same thing, we have different experiences. And if you live in a different kind of existence, you may see water as pus and blood versus water. Like a liquid you may perceive as pus and blood, etc. So we may have very different experiences, even in the human realm, but even more radically if you live in a different realm. That accounts for the possibility of other forms of life. Because in the end, it's just the mind. The reality of every living being is their mind. It's what they perceive. So if someone perceives something totally separate, totally different, like, for instance, a mentally impaired person, right? Someone who has mental problems, they may perceive like a whole war going on around them. In their mind, that's true. That is the afflictive obscurations, right, of their afflictive obscurations. They lead to this perception in the mind. And we call this person insane just because we don't see it. In relation to what we perceive, we say this person is mentally challenged, whatever, right? But that's their reality, okay? So in that way, therefore, our samsara is our mind, our body and our mind, but mainly our mind that is affected by afflictive obscurations. That's what you fear on the middling scope. On the higher scope, you fear your own cognitive obscurations, mainly. Because so indirectly you fear the suffering of sentient beings because you're not able to benefit sentient beings effectively. And the Buddha is free from that. So fearlessness means here no fear of his or her own afflictive and cognitive, mainly cognitive obscurations, which are the obscurations to attaining enlightenment. It's that, or to say it from another perspective, the obscurations that keep you from being most effective in your effort to benefit sentient beings. Does that make sense? Or not? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. If it doesn't make sense, please say so. Sippy?
The sign that is said that the Buddha knows that everything doesn't exist. It's actually
inherent existence. The Bodhisattva knows to a certain degree, of course, the Bodhisattva. Not like a Buddha. Inherent existence? Right, but even the Bodhisattva who's on the 8th level, he's no longer involved. I keep saying he just because it's easier. So a Bodhisattva on the 8th level is no longer involved, there's no longer attachment. The difficulty they have is that they cannot see the true truth simultaneously. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is they don't know exactly what's best for the other person to such a degree that they can give the best teachings. That's the main worry. A Buddha is free from that because now the mind just knows spontaneously, effortlessly. Okay? Does that make sense? So the Buddha has overcome all shortcomings because they've eliminated... Is there a question? Is there a question? No. All the afflictive and cognitive obscurations in their mental continuum. So they're able to lead other sentient beings to the same state of complete enlightenment. And the analogy is that of someone who's trapped in a swamp and has freed him or herself and is now able to pull everyone else out. So the fearlessness, the fear here is fear of our own obscurations, basically. The subtlest ones being the ones that keep us from being a Buddha. You can remove the afflictive ones and still... The Bodhisattva on the 8th ground has eliminated the ones to liberation, has reached liberation, but continues to work towards enlightenment, is not satisfied with that state, because of that fear of his own obscurations. Does that make sense?
So this is the fear mentioned in the house? Yes. Since there are no obscuration, there is no fear.
Oh, yes. Oh, that, yeah. Yes. Since Buddhas are omniscient, they are the most qualified and skillful teachers because they're able to lead each sentient beings to enlightenment in the fastest possible way. So it makes sense that they don't have fear. And they're experts. Why? Because if there's knowledge, if I know what the other person needs, etc., I know the best way to teach them. Well, that's the definition of the perfect teacher. Knowing exactly how to present it that the other person will know. That accounts for all the different tenet systems in Buddhism. That's why there's so many tenet systems. Do you understand? Why? Why all these tenet systems? Different people needed to be taught different things. So the Buddha was not like a teacher, like ordinarily, like a teacher who teaches this topic here, this topic there. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what's best for each individually, but the Buddha walked around India, and whoever he came across, in that moment, the Buddha knew exactly what was best for that person. And sometimes it was not the highest view, it was the stepping stone to teaching the highest view. Okay? Contradicting himself an hour later with another person. It seemed to be contradictory, but of course it was according to this person's needs, etc. And it was just a temporary measure until they were ready to receive other teachings. And the Buddha knew in that moment, this much is enough, this much is too much. Okay, so perfect teacher, and again it makes sense. If you freed your mind from any obscuration, that's the result. And then the first quality here is described, well, there's no obscurations. The second one is saying, well, then all the qualities come through. And what is the most important quality, since the Buddha can't take away our suffering, can't take away our non-virtues, cannot confer his own realizations, is teaching. So that he's a good teacher is important. But then if the Buddha lacks the initiative to teach, then he could be the best teacher ever, be fully qualified. But if there's no compassion, no driving force, that would be a problem. So Buddhas, of course, have great compassion. They're driven by their incredible compassion. No one has greater compassion, not even the Bodhisattva has that level of compassion, just because there's nothing in the way. Everything that's in the way to be fully compassionate has been removed. And lastly, they're not pleased with material offerings. But then we make material offerings. Is the Buddha displeased with us making material offerings?
It's a symbol.
Pardon?
It's symbolic, isn't it? The material offerings in this context.
Okay, they're symbolic, I agree, but why do them?
Because you need to have something physical to express things that are not physical.
But the Buddhas are displeased. They're not pleased with that. It's for us.
Yeah, so, this is the way we communicate. It's a tool for people.
Yes, but here's saying he's not pleased with material offerings, but with offerings of practice. So shouldn't we, instead of making material offerings, practice?
Both.
Both? here, he's not pleased with material offerings. We should offer practice. So he's not pleased with it. We shouldn't do anything that displeases the Buddha. Pardon? It is our practice. Making offerings is our practice, right? So here what this is saying that to do it just to please the Buddha, well, forget it. We don't need to give the Buddha an apple. The Buddha doesn't need, yeah.
You don't understand it correctly, it sounds tricky.
Okay.
It doesn't please with the practice, but then they make giving it doesn't please with the material object, but then one of the practices to give him. So don't give me the practice. So it sounds tricky, and let's understanding that he's not have a material object. When they say, because I'm displeased with it when you give me, but hey, this is your practice, so give me, please. It's coming from the back door. Unless you understand what it means.
Yes. I mean, they're not displeased, actually. They're just not pleased. But, okay, so they're not pleased. I mean, it's not like, wow, they gave me so much stuff. Oh, great, right? That's what would be an ordinary reaction. So when we see this, again, when we see people make offerings and we don't know what all this is about, it seems ridiculous. When you walk into a Thai temple, there's a statue. They give all this food. There's this criticism like, why don't they give the food to the poor? And I get that. And in the end, it is given to the poor. You don't leave it there for a week. You leave it there for the day, and then you pass it out and give it to people, actually. So what we're saying here is that this is for our own benefit, practicing generosity, and why Buddha is so effective. We'll talk about this. Something about the object, right? So it's really about prostrations. Why do we do prostrations? Why do we do prostration? What is this thing about prostrations? It seems for an ordinary person you bow to the king for the sake of the king, right? Okay? So it's a symbol of humility. Why do we bow towards why is this whole thing of prostrations? It seems we give offerings to please the other person. That doesn't make sense. Why would a Buddha be pleased by that? So it says very clearly. So it's like my uncle. My uncle assumes, because the Dalai Lama loves, he must have some ulterior motive. He wants people to like him. Or my sister, takes a picture with the guy in a wheelchair because, he wants to be seen as compassionate. That's how we act. We do everything for our own benefit. And we assume with the king or some ruler, whatever, does it for his own benefit. So it's really hard. The same action of making offerings, of making prostrations, we feel in the case of offering to a king and making prostrations to the king, is just to please his ego. And that seems contradictory to the whole religious aspect, right? So sometimes the same action actually means the opposite. The same action actually means the opposite. And we sometimes read into things, maybe I'm taking it too far here, but there's one way in which I came to this through a modern philosopher. He's already dead, but I forget whether it's Heidegger or Wittgenstein, one of the two. What is it? Heidegger or Wittgenstein. Anyway, so he was once talking to his student. I'm taking a big detour here. You'll see in a moment. He was once talking to his student, and his student said, "I understand why people think that the sun revolves around the earth." And the philosopher asked, "Why?" And she said, "Because it looks that way." And his response was, what would it look if it was the other way around? Would it look any different? So people assume that because what we perceive, they assume that must be it because that's the most obvious. Forgetting that, in fact, of course, the earth is revolving around the sun. It looks the same. So why do we assume one over the other? Just because we're more familiar with it, that's it. We're more familiar with it. There's a sense, I'm the center of the universe. So, therefore, everything revolves around me. So this, I guess, also expresses itself in the way we perceive things. This, for me, also accounts for the fact that a lot of scholars believe Mahayana Buddhism wasn't taught by the Buddha, because it appeared later. But the reason for that is that the Buddha didn't teach it to a lot of people. So he taught it in secret. If that was the case, it would also appear later. So how do you infer that the Buddha didn't teach it because it appeared later? If the Buddha, if he had taught it and it was taught in secret, it would have the same result. So scholars are so sure Mahayana Buddhism wasn't taught by the Buddha. It's like with the sun, right? Just because it appears that way. Okay. And likewise, here it seems most people are pleased when they get offerings. Most people are pleased when someone bows to them, right? Most people have an ego, so, who minds a little bit of worship of the ego? We worship it anyway. If other people do, thank you. But of course, that's why it's misunderstood. Or worshipping a being who's not worthy to be worshipped. But actually, it's just for us. Why do we do prostrations? Prostrations are just mental. Actually, when His Holiness talks about prostrations, he says, if you don't have the right attitude, it's exercise. It's just exercise. It's just physical exercise. So the prostrations take place in the mind. And again, this reminds me of what we're used to. In the physical world, if you want to pour water into a vessel, you can't keep the vessel up and pour something into it. That's just gravity. It's just simple gravity. So I guess this sense of like, if I feel proud, I put up my head, right? It's just a sense, I'm a little bit higher than others. I'm superior. I'm not taking anything from others. I don't need anything from others. If I needed some wisdom I'm glad it's it, to be poured into me, right? I need to go lower. I guess it has to do with gravity and having lived in a world with that. I'm not sure. But there's a sense I lower myself automatically when I want to learn something. I open myself to new knowledge. And a prostration is that. You lower yourself to something greater in order to receive something. So basically before a teaching, we do prostrations to receive, the inspiration, the teachings of the Buddha. Right? That's it. And you're just going through the motions, doing it physically, because our mind is so distracted, it's really difficult to keep with the object. So if we do it physically, we are more likely to be mindful. And you do it 3 times, because the first time you usually miss it. Second time, even third time, it's like, right? So that's why prostration. So it's all done for our own sake, to be open, to be humble enough, to then receive the teachings. We make offerings to practice generosity. And it's difficult to be generous. If you put it on your altar and you can later eat it, so much easier, right? So whenever we as monks and nuns, we're given an offering, we're supposed to offer it first. Leave it aside and not use it right away. Of course, if it's like life-saving medicine, of course we're going to use it. But if it's not urgent, you first offer it. So it's an opportunity of generosity. You give it up, and then you eat it. So, right? It's also part of this method. You give it to your right hand. If you have a hard time practicing, take it from your left hand and give it to your right hand. You're already getting used to the mind that gives, because generosity is a mind that wants to give. Okay? And if you can't give it like really away, you practice that way. So just get into the habit of giving. Right hand to left hand to right hand. Or give it to the Buddhas, knowing that they don't actually receive it. That's one way of looking at it. But of course, actually believing this is the actual Buddha, being inspired in the right way, and giving it, and later on distributing it. That way you've practiced generosity with a very effective object, plus other sentient beings. So see, there are different levels of generosity, and the Buddha gives us this opportunity. We can't have the Buddha kind of call him up and say, can you just come over and sit on my altar for an hour? I want to make an offering. So that's why you have the symbolic Buddha. All right, anyway. Therefore, if this is our practice about giving to the Buddha, Buddha couldn't care less, right? But, of course, it's for our own sake. So everything we do, and the best way, this also reminds me of relying on our teacher. Oftentimes when we have a Lama, we want to be physically around the Lama. That doesn't please the Lama. what pleases the Lama, who's the representative of the Buddha. And actually, we see the Lama as a Buddha. Even if the Lama is not a Buddha, we get the full benefit of relying on the Buddha. But then we have the difficulty to make certain behavior work. So we have to be careful. We shouldn't just take any person. We have to make sure it be someone who we can really rely on. We don't have a hard time seeing them as a Buddha. But the point is, with a Lama, a qualified Lama is not pleased by us rubbing shoulders. And that's what so many people try to do. They want to be physically around their Lama. But in most cases, most of the Tibetans, they rely on as His Holiness, seeing him as their main teacher. And yes, they go for teachings, but they don't stay around, try to get an audience and, try everything to just be seen. No, they want to practice. So when His Holiness walk past, they're not the ones in the front. They're in the back. They're just rejoicing. They're just happy seeing. And I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. Of course, if you're never around His Holiness, you want to get a blessing. But that's not most important. Most important is to practice. So reliance on the teacher is practicing what the teacher teaches. That's it. That's real reliance. And that's where you make an actual connection. You think, oh, the Lama taught me this, I'm putting it into practice. That's when you connect with the Lama. Okay. So only a Buddha possesses those 4 qualities. For the sake of developing strong confidence and faith in the Buddha, in the Buddhas, it is extremely important to examine and contemplate these qualities. Okay. So in that sense, if we generate strong confidence and faith in Buddhas, we come to see them as worthy objects of refuge. This in turn enables us to regard their teachings and their spiritual community as worthy of being considered a refuge. So here's a little bit the other way around. First you rely on the teacher, but it's a back and forth. It's a back and forth. So someone said in the beginning that with regard to the Dharma, the Buddha is the one who lives the Dharma. There's Dharma on legs, if you like, right? It's basically the walking Dharma. So you see, this is why it's so important. The teachings, of course, are the main Dharma, but it's all theoretical unless you see someone who actually lives it. Okay? So with the Buddha, you have both. You have Buddha and Dharma in one. With the Dharma, although that's the main part, but you don't have the Buddha aspect. You don't have the aspect of this is actually possible to realize. Do you see how there's a difference? No?
No, I want you to repeat this.
I'll repeat this, okay. All right. Now why here the Buddha is mentioned more as an object of refuge with these 4 aspects here. And you may wonder, well, the Dharma is the main refuge. Why not talk more about the qualities of the Dharma? Well, the reason is that actually the Buddha is a combination of Buddha and Dharma. In the sense like Buddha is the one who teaches the Dharma, but who also lives. The Dharma is within the Buddha, if you like. So cessations and truth of cessations and truth of the path are within the Buddha anyway, in the greatest sense. But also all the other qualities that are, of course, included in those, but love, compassion, skillful actions, knowing exactly what to say, knowing to teach in the right way, only because the Buddha lives the Dharma. So this is what's so important. If you have a teacher who doesn't, like a Lama, for instance, like really a Lama you rely on, not just you and I, we're just discussing things, but when you have an actual teacher, then if they don't act upon what they teach, it's not going to affect you. That's why you need a teacher who has realizations. To receive teachings like from someone like the Dalai Lama, and no doubt His Holiness the Dalai Lama has, if not, well, the realizations of a Buddha, then Arya being 100%, right? Bodhisattva high up. So this is where the case where the Dharma this person teaches is part of this person, lives the Dharma. That is so important because it has a different effect on the mind, which is why it's not enough to receive teachings just in the context here, but you should receive teachings from an actual Lama. Like Jadarubaji is coming soon. He's also, I don't know whether he's as high as His Holiness, could be. Honestly, he could be. except the way he manifests is not as such a high Lama. But he could be. It could be equally, right? But that Geshe Rinpoche is a really advanced practitioner, and he's coming to Israel. So he's right here. You don't even have to travel to Israel, to India, only to the desert. All right. Okay. So in that case, that's why it's acceptable to have these four qualities here. Have the four qualities here because you have both combined, actually, Buddha and Dharma. Yes?
People often ask, how do we know the Buddha does have these qualities? What do you say?
How do we know? I think we can only know once we're Buddha. That's when we actually know. So we can inferentially know, but direct experience, direct knowledge is only possible once you're a Buddha yourself. So know means believe, assuming. How do we know? Well, again, it comes down to learning the Dharma, studying the Dharma, of course, to a certain degree, understand these qualities, the kind of compassion that a Buddha has, the kind of... The main part is there's no sense of an I, or this sense, like the self-grasping, self-centeredness, that's definitely gone. Well, for an arhat it would be gone too, but in the case of a Buddha, even more so. So how do you know a Lama has these qualities? Well, by basically taking any opportunity, the way they behave, hearing from other people if you can't be present, or just, looking at their lives. If you hear to what the Dalai Lama nowadays, it's very easy to find out what His Holiness the Dalai Lama does. So through other people, etc. So you get a sense that this person is special. But not just that, when the Dalai Lama teaches, the way it affects your own mind. And do you really know this is a Buddha? No, in the end, we don't know. It takes time. We have to take time. We get to know more and more about him. And sometimes people even, they connect with His Holiness on a mental basis. So you start thinking about it, you make prayers, and suddenly things pop up in your mind and you're inspired in a way that you're not inspired by another person. So all these are little things that lead you to have a sense this person is initially special, and then having a sense this person is living the Dharma. But in the end, I don't have any clear-cut answer, as in like, you do this, then you know. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It's a process. It's a process, which is why initially in the Pramanavartika, it emphasizes learn the Dharma first. Gain an understanding first, see that you have some sense it works, and only then should you really rely on a Lama. Our Lama is not a replacement for a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or parents. Because that's what it sometimes feels like. To a lot of people, the Lama just takes on the job of a parent or of a protective boyfriend or girlfriend. And I'll see this again and again, that when you want to just be around them and you want the Lama to pay attention to you, and that's a worldly kind of protection. So it takes a long time, and that's why it's always emphasized to check your Lama for a long time. We have one problem in the West. Why we're in such a hurry? Because we don't really believe in reincarnation. We don't really believe in reincarnation. We want to do everything in a really short time because we're thinking, I only have 30, 40 years left, I better hurry up. Okay? It's not because sentient beings are suffering, I really need to rush it because I need to get there quickly. That's not our motivation. I want to get there before I die because I'm not sure I'm going to live again. If you're not living again, don't worry about it. Why would you do all this? Because in one lifetime you're not going to make it. It's actually ridiculous to work towards enlightenment. That was just one lifetime. Forget it. You're not going to become a Buddha in one lifetime. I mean, Maitreya, Milarepa did not become a Buddha in one lifetime. Which, your sense of that would mean there's only one life, and in this life he started, and in this life he completed it. No way. This is a total misunderstanding of what it means to become enlightened in one lifetime. What does it mean to become enlightened in one lifetime? What does it actually mean? You start in this life and you become a Buddha in this life? Forget it. No way. What does it mean?
The
life